Dave, thank you so much for joining me today.
So excited to be here. Thank you.
Let's start with the origin story of Deep Sentinel. You mentioned that it was a near miss at your own home that convinced you that the security market was broken and that something needs to change. So, can you talk us through that moment and how that crystallized the idea for Deep Sentinel?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and this is going to sound a little self-serving, so I just throw this out there. This is not a promotional, thing. It's just the freaking truth, man. And that was really what caught me. And that's that the security systems and security solutions that we have, we as business owners, we as human beings, homeowners, renters, whatever, they don't work. Right. And I don't mean they don't work like, oh, like it fails 10% of the time. I mean, they don't work ever, and they don't actually do anything almost at all. The word that is the number one selling point of all the security solutions out there, other than Deep Sentinel, but is deterrence. And deterrence is like a cool word. It's like, yeah, that's gonna stop people. What deterrence means is it allows them to stop of their own accord, and that does not stop people. And so what happened was my neighbor had a home invasion, and she has an alarm. She has like super expensive security cameras. I was like on the security committee at my HOA, and I convinced a bunch of my neighbors to spend tens of thousands of dollars on security cameras because they were like higher resolution and they had this support agreement. And what we had when we reviewed this as a community in our neighborhood watch meeting with the police officer was a video of a bunch of guys standing outside of her home for minutes, preparing to go in, checking their masks, checking their weapons, and then breaking into her house and then leaving some, 25, 30 minutes later, and no evidence that led to an arrest. So, number one, it didn't do anything in the moment when you needed it. And then number two, even after the fact, all you have was this like pretty useless video. And I was just, as a dad and a husband, and like, I was so floored that I had gone to ADT and I spent all this energy and yes, I negotiated with him and I got an extra 6 window sensors and all this stuff. And it just doesn't really work. I mean, even alarm systems, if they go off, I want to say about 60% of Americans live in a city where the police department is so bogged down by false alarm calls from alarm systems, they don't respond to them at all. They have no guaranteed response. And unless you have some sort of a verification, like I'm in the house, person in here with me, they won't come. They won't come in 20 minutes. They won't come in 2 hours. They won't come the next day. They just won't. They'll put it in a little file and send it off in the never land. So that to me, I was like, oh my God, is there something that's more important than security? I'm a nerd, so like no. And then is there anything that's solved worse than this? I can't think of anything. It'd be like if you had, I don't know how technical your listeners are, but like it'd be like if you had a computer and you're like, I'll just put a warning sign that says if you hack into my system and steal all my data, I'll come get you. But here's how I think that would work super well. Not at all, ever. It just that is the entire state of the entire physical security industry. And I was like, oh my God, how do we do this? I met some people who like had created a neighborhood watch group and they stayed up all night and watched their neighbors' cameras. And I was like, oh, that's cool. And they said, yeah, and the police will come immediately because I tell them exactly what's going on. And most of the time we can just stop people by like flashing a light on them at the right time and like coming outside and yelling at from our houses. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. But that sounds very tedious. And voila, fast forward, that was when I thought if we just stick some AI in there, I can make the tedium go down by a factor of 100 and make the efficacy go way up. And that is what Deep Sentinel is.
Amazing. Love the vivid examples and the analogies. So it's a good segue into my next question. For people who may not know, can you explain what Deep Sentinel does today?
Yeah, and if you don't know, please do. So what Deep Sentinel is it's a combination of security cameras, and we support all different brands of security cameras that are out there. A unique proprietary AI that we have built that is specifically tuned to identify suspicious behavior and suspicious individuals, and then putting a human being right into the loop within 5-10 seconds. And so if the AI detects something suspicious, a human being will be reviewing the video in 5 to 10 seconds and then able to intervene using something simple like two-way audio or something a little bit more aggressive like a siren, or even something really aggressive if we actually do stop like hostage type situations, we've got smoke and pepper spray solutions as well for serious security issues. And the basic principle being that intervention in a preventive way solves the like an ounce of prevention is worth a billion tons of cure. And number two is that if we can just get really, really early in the process, usually the level of intervention required is really small. Again, kind of think about this in the context of a cybersecurity or medical situation. If you catch it early, you can stop almost anything from happening with just the smallest of interventions.
Amazing. Going a level deeper into the product. So you mentioned cameras and you're building them instead of relying on what's available off the shelf. What advantages do you get by this vertical integration? Meaning you have your AI, you have your hardware, you have your live like human guards, and it's being offered as a full solution. So what advantages do you get by doing this versus kind of the
Yeah. So kind of more of a vertical approach versus a horizontal approach. So there's two things that I think are particularly important. Number one is just high speed compatibility. So the ability to deliver in a complex heterogeneous environment. So when you think about security cameras, there are so many. There's Ring, there's Arlo, there's the Chinese brands, there's a number of U.S. brands that make them. There are not really any very good standards, and so having to integrate vertically deeply with a number of them is pretty important. The second thing, though, which is the one that actually pushed me to do this, is that when I reformulated this problem, I analyzed that situation with my neighbor. I realized that every other vendor in the space was thinking about it kind of the way you're asking the question. What if I just do a layer? What if I just make the AI? What if I just make the cameras? What if I just do the guard portion of this? What if I just do the police interaction portion of this? And that's how the industry works. And what happens when you have a massively heterogeneous environment with each of these kind of specialty layers is that each integration between one layer and the next is lowest common denominator, meaning that I'm going to use the dumbest parts of the AI if I'm buying an AI vendor. I'm going to use the dumbest parts of the camera so that I have broad compatibility. I'm going to use guards that are just like as basic and rudimentary as possible. And sure enough, when I went and looked at the industry, there was this fledgling sector called remote video monitoring. And it was exactly that. They were using AI from the 80s and 90s. They still are. They were using guards that really didn't know much about security. They weren't well trained. They were just sitting there watching the panel of videos. Kind of like if you go to a building in New York and you see the people like slumped over a chair, supposedly watching the video cameras, that was what was going on in this industry. There wasn't any software designed to make sure that all that was done at quality. And so the biggest thing I got by doing the vertical integration, a lot of people ask, did you save money? Yeah, a little bit. Not really though, because I had to build hardware, and building hardware undoes all of the economic advantages you get from anything else. What I really got though is we have the absolute, unconditionally, universally best, fastest, cheapest solution. We stop thousands of crimes every single month. But we're now compatible with about 20 different brands of cameras out there in the world. And we've tuned our AI so that it solves just this one problem. It identifies suspicious people. It does it quickly. It does it in real time. It helps our guards make sure that our guards are efficient. It helps us hire the right people that can sit at the console. We monitor the activity of our guards on the console. So if they're even just lagging a little bit, like I didn't take my coffee this morning, we know, right? And we don't know a month later when a customer complains. We know within 30 seconds of your behavior changing because by vertically integrating, what I did was I vertically integrated not just the software, we vertically integrated all the data. And so we have a universal end-to-end view of every event. So when someone walks to the front door of your business, we don't just know that they walked to the front door. We also know that that went to guard JJ. JJ was reviewing two other events. He is one of our top 10 percentile guard, and he clicked on it and he investigated it and he verified that that person was the standard package delivery person for that property. He did all that in 15 seconds. And I have all that data wrapped around that little tiny 15-second video clip.
amazing. Earlier you made a point about how the police are bogged down by all these alarms and false positives. So now with AI in the mix, how do you deal with false positives? And also from a product sense, how do you just which side of the line do you err on, and how do you just deal with the accuracy issue
Yeah,
here?
that's a great question. Just so I know, how technical is most of the audience here that's going to be listening?
Let's say, let's assume like medium technical, but I'd love plain English explanations too, just so it's more
All
accessible.
right. You guide me and I'll do my best, right? So at a high level, we do a principle based engineering effort, right? And as a principle based company, right? I mean, we're very mission based. We take the stopping of crimes and the protecting of people so incredibly seriously. And so we do the same thing with our AI strategy. So principle number one is no false negatives. And so we tune to have false positives intentionally. We tune both the structure and the parameters of the AI, as well as the sensitivity settings that we use. We also have other logic that runs on the backside of these various events. All of those are tuned similarly. So we start off with a very, very strong threshold of zero false negatives, and then we start progressively iterating to improve the false positives. And so when we do that, we remove the false positives in our side by doing things like we have a whole bunch of, in fact, if you look at our patent portfolio, I'm so stoked on our patent portfolio. I usually am not a big fan of patents, to be honest with you, in the software world. We were so far ahead of the curve on AI in video surveillance for remote video monitoring that we have all the fundamental patents. And what's cool about them is that when you look at these patents, there are things like we're going to take all that data we have from the guards and everything they clicked on, and we integrate that into our model. So we don't just train on, is this a person, is this a dog? We also train on, what did the guard do? How quickly did they respond? How quickly did they call the police? Were they angry when they called the police? Were the police angry at them? Did they dispatch police officers and get there in 10 seconds with guns drawn? Or did they take a report? All of that information can go into this. The problem of false positive, false negative, as we look at internally, becomes a lot more complex, which means there's a lot more space for optimization. As it relates to police false positives, by having the human in the loop and all this data at our fingertips, we have pretty much zero false positives. We never call the police departments with false alarms. At the bare minimum, we may say there's a suspicious person standing right here doing this. They're not responding to my audio commands. They're not leaving the property, and I don't recognize them from the property. Even if that person is not actively committing a crime, that's definitely not a false alarm, right? We've described the situation. The police are fully armed to make any decision they want. If it's a busy night, that's just not on my priority list as a cop. If it's a slow night and we're in a small town and we're really kind of enforcing trespassing, maybe that's something they want to respond to. And so one of the neatest things about that part of the interface is by being able to provide real-time information about suspects, crimes, potential weapons, victims, the police have a system, which is a computer-aided dispatch system that already has these priorities. And we plug straight into that with every single piece of information that we have. A standard alarm from like Vivint or ADT, that has its own category, which is don't go. And that's why they don't go.
And when you think about different levels of intervention, meaning just having a loud alarm is different from like pepper spray because it's
For
like taking an
example,
actual action. Yeah, for example. So how do you think about, how do you weigh
mhm.
escalation risk versus deterrence? And how do you make those decisions? Because you don't want to pepper spray somebody who's just an uncle who's visiting and you just don't, AI doesn't know. So how do you think about these different levels of interventions when it's
So
automated?
that's a great question. By the way, some people do want to do that, but I think it just equally importantly, how do we decide not to do that? And so what we do is with our levels of intervention and our modality of interaction, we took a very product centric view for this. The security industry is a very, very service oriented industry. And so the average way, I'm going to start off by describing that first because I think it'll give you the backdrop for this. The average way a security company does this is they hire a former special forces person who comes in and sells the customer. Says, "Oh yeah, blah, 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 blah." Not yet quite. It's like massive lack of transfer of information. Then they quit, and the next person shows up, and there's even less transfer of information. And so again, this is kind of the service oriented view. So when I looked at this, and my team and I looked at this, we said, how do we take a product oriented view? How do we tear that into the model that we actually use is AWS. So I was at Amazon really early, and I really loved the way that they looked at computing. Right? They said instead of talking about a computer, talk about storage, talk about compute, talk about memory, talk about caches, and you turn it into an individual microservice. And that's what we did with security. So we have individual microservices for things like there's a medical emergency. We're protecting a public pool that has ours. What are the expectations that we do there? And this is away from your question around like pepper spray versus yelling, but at the end of every single one of those procedures is a set of steps about here's what the first intervention is, here's what the second interaction, here's how it escalates, here's how it further escalates. And then again, by putting it in software, we can also say, you're here. You've now reached the point where we need a supervisor approval, we need a customer approval, or we need some extenuating circumstances. And so we've implemented all of that into the software. And this kind of goes back to your original question about vertical integration. No one else is even thinking about doing that because nobody else holds the guards and the cameras and the AI and the video feeds all in the same place.
Amazing. Let's talk about how the data is processed. So, can you talk about what types of data is getting captured as a starting point, and also with regards to processing on the device and the cloud, a hybrid model? So, how do you think about processing this huge volume of data that's almost getting streamed to you from many different homes?
Yeah, so there's a lot of data. First of all, I'll start with like kind of the 4 or 5 most important chunks, right? So the first is the video feed. The second would be the history of that property. Are there other things that have happened to that property that kind of go into that? How about this camera? Does this camera specifically have issues? And then the next chunk of data that we then look at is what was the guard's response time and interaction? Did they click in immediately? We have multiple views and screens. Did they investigate? Did they zoom in? What type of behavior did the guard do on the console? And then the third chunk of data that we really look at that I find really interesting is the audio streams. When we intervene, was there a response? When we turn on the siren, was there a response? What was the response from the person from the video and from audio? Then if we call the customer, how does the customer respond? That's both the transcription as well as tone analysis, things like that. And then when we call the police, how did the police respond? How long did it take for them to respond? How quickly did they deploy officers? Did the officers arrive? There's like various codes, right? Did they arrive with just their partner? Did they arrive code 3 with 4 people, weapons drawn? Did they have hands on the weapon? Did they have long guns drawn? These are all different levels of escalation that we can observe from the police as well that give us data that can say, hey, if I see this thing at the very beginning of the event, and that has a very high probability of resulting in 10 officers with long guns, that's a pretty high severity event. If instead I have this that results in no investigation or maybe a little bit of investigation and then no call to the police and no call to the customer and no officers with guns, that's a low severity event. And so that is my number one, again, kind of going back to your false positive question, that's my number one chunk of data that I want to look at and use to make the system faster, better, and even cheaper, even faster, even better, and even cheaper than it is today.
Let's talk about the business model and the market. If you look at you mentioned Ring early on, and Ring has neighborhood scale, and there is Workata, they own a segment. So when you think about Deep Sentinel and the positioning in the market, like how do you, where do you place it, and how do you explain it to a new customer who's considering a solution?
Yeah, so I mean, we support a lot of third-party hardware. I mean, you picked 2 that we don't yet support. We would love to. If the Verkada team's listening or Jamie Siminoff over at Ring, give me a call. But we do support a third-party hardware, and so that's a big part of this is that we see this as an ecosystem. Our go-to-market strategy is through local dealers and installers, and so these folks tend to bring together, all right, I'm going to bring in an analytics package, I'm going to bring in a security package, and then I'm going to do your door and window sensors, or I'm going to do something called CPTED, which is crime prevention through environmental design. I'm going to help you design your property to be more secure. And so we partner with some of the people that do the entire solution for the customers. And then we generally integrate with almost everybody out there that we can.
And when you look at the various channels that you've sold through, like direct to consumer, through installers, through integrators, so what channel has worked well, and also what are the learnings you can share for somebody new who's trying to build a hardware software company and trying to figure out how to go to market, how to get to customers?
So I'll say the dealer and installer is definitely our best path to market right now. And then I'll add to that, I am also 5 years ahead of anybody else who's listening to this and asking that question. And it takes about 4 to 5 years to get that to scale. And it took us about 4 to 5 years to get it to scale. It was really, really challenging. It was hard to find what's your ideal customer profile, then inject that into your ideal partner and reseller profile. And then there's all these supply chain issues. Like a lot of the last mile installers, they make a decision on suppliers based on variables that you and I would find surprising. And so you have to know what those things are. And as silly as they may seem to you or I, that's how they're making the decision. You have to think about them just like a customer. I don't really care. Here you are, sir. Let's make sure that we can get this done. And that took, again, like 4 to 5 years. In terms of the total go to market, though, what we have found that's really neat is that we have been able to combine some of the I don't know if you know Andrew Chen, but like the best practices of D2C into our B2B and reseller model. And that is something, like just do email testing, do landing page testing, do lots of vertical based testing. And so by doing that, we've actually combined that together in a way that I'm really proud of. My team has done just an amazing job of this. And so what we do is we build out like vertical solutions for auto lots, which is one of our top verticals. And what we do is we'll have a ton of content that we'll produce and we'll publish it using D2C channels. Fast feedback, lots of feedback, tune, then use the partner channel as the broadcast and scalability. And so using that combination has been really powerful. The other thing that we found in that same vein is that feeding high quality marketing programs and leads into resellers that have $100,000 top line revenue or $1 million a year in top line revenue. They don't have the room in that budget to go do LPO and SEO and SEM and content development. We do. And so by partnering with them to provide them that, we're also providing them a ton of value.
Deploying in a residential setting versus commercial setting, I'm sure there are differences. But if you had to compare and contrast along the dimensions of marketing to them, selling to them, deploying and supporting, and also just the product needs, so how would you compare these two big, like
Yeah.
broad
So I'll start
segments?
off right off the bat and say B2C is way more profitable, almost infinitely so. The churn is almost zero. We have almost no commercial churn unless a business like goes out of business really for the most part. On the B2C side, we have B2C type churn. And so that's something that you have to take into account in your total economics and in your marketing planning. That said though, what we found is that marketing channels, when they make a division between B2C and B2B, are generally just charging you more money. And so being able to not use that targeting and have a solution for B2C and a solution for B2B on the marketing side, it means that we don't have to use those kind of BS segmentation tools that are at the edge, and they don't really work that well. We've tested them, and if you could just service all the demand, which if you can't, then you can't, right? So that's why we have B2C, is because we can service the demand. Then the total cost for customer acquisition relative to customer LTV is way more efficient than it is if you're just focused on, especially on B2B, because B2B is such a competitive marketplace for selling. And so by having a conjoined marketing program, it does get confusing at times, but the economics work out much, much, much better for us. The third thing I'll add in, just because I wanted, this is where I live. In that better, faster, cheaper solution, residential is way harder. It is way, 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 way harder to solve. To take it and programmatically say, we're going to do this, and this, a business generally can ingest that information. Residential can't as well. And so we also see it as our gym time as a company. That's where we go to build muscle. That's where we go to train. That's where we go to cross train. And then we go out on the field and we go B2C and we sprint, right? But it is our residential is so hard and so strenuous. I love it because it keeps my whole team, like it keeps us all on point all the time.
Right. No, that's a great summary. I love the gym like training example, and that's what it feels like. Because consumers, they're very finicky. We churn a lot. We don't want to pay a lot, and we have high demands. And on the commercial B2B side, it's the opposite, and that's where. So it's a very good example.
You can solve residential and make it profitable. You can make commercial really profitable, and
Right.
that's
Right.
really a big part of, like, when I say we're better, faster, cheaper, we're more than 50% less than our next closest competitor. We're closer to like 3 to 4 times cheaper.
Now, let's talk about regulation. California and also many states, they're debating regulations on autonomous security, robotics, and I'm sure more is coming. So, what legislation are you watching the most closely, or rather, what impacts your business as you see it in the next couple of years?
I see the government more like a consumer, just kind of dovetailing off that last conversation. I see them more like a consumer than like a business. They're fickle, they're unpredictable, they change their mind all the time, and they act with emotion versus with logic. Not all government, but let's just say, for example, our government acts that way. So, in that way, what I'm watching most closely as it relates to legislation is really the consumer opinions, right? Our opinions swaying this way or this way. There was a great analysis that came out a couple of months ago, and this looked at like what I would consider the most objective part of government, which is the judicial branch. And even the judicial branch over 100-year time frame tends to follow population sentiment. It's not some kind of ideal driven, the Constitution is X or the Constitution is Y. While that is the calling, in general, our court system tends to follow public opinion. And so I'm waxing poetic a little bit here, but like, so what I watch is not any individual policy as it relates to AI, but really where the fear spikes, where are the demand spikes, where are the extreme incidents that create either of those two things, much more so than any individual policy. I think if I were to speak directly to the one that you highlighted, which is autonomous security, this is where our system, where we have specific deliverables that are constrained and then controlled by humans, where the human is in the loop as the controlling function and the AI is the supporting function. I think that keeps us in a more conservative spot so that I can answer that way. If we were all autonomous and all AI, I would definitely need to be all over, where all these policies were. But our system is 100% designed to have humans in the loop all the time.
Another important consideration here is insurance. So if I own a car dealership and if I proactively take action to install a security system, maybe I use Deep Sentinel. Obviously, I want a discount because the insurance company's job is now a little bit easier. So how does insurance shape out with this autonomous security, and two, what role does Deep Sentinel play in at least structuring those deals, if not outright driving them?
Yeah, so we have partnerships in various stages with a lot of the major insurance companies. We already get small discounts, but we're working with them to get a higher level of understanding into their underwriting. Insurance does tend to be a pretty slow moving industry, right? I mean, actuarists have the highest job satisfaction of any category for the reason that they just go home at 5 o'clock and I don't think they think about work at all. And then they come back and do the same thing the next day. But that's my opinion. And so like in general, I expect it will take another 5 years or so before insurance takes things like this seriously and is able to provide, can call it a quality assessment where do you have this solution is not enough. It's okay, how many cameras do you have? How well protected are they? What resolution are they? Which provider is doing this? What's the gradation of that provider? Things like that. Because when you look at like fire, which is I think a much more mature space, when you look at the data that go into fire models, they aren't just like, do you give a discount because you're in a good zone or a bad zone? Fire models tend to have 3 to 5 different zones and ratings, and they have qualifiers for wind, they have qualifiers for slope. And that's where I think this is going to get to, where the security component plays a really serious role. Because as we all are seeing, security and crime is massively more impactful on all of our lives than it was 15 years ago. And so I think that degree of breaking it down is going to be really important. Nationwide is one of our top investors. I love working with them. They're very forward thinking. And so we talk with them about this almost every quarter and kind of just gauge where they're at in that maturity life cycle.
I want to talk about company building for a second. So let's talk about Dave, the founder, like 20 years ago versus today. If you had to share nuggets on, and you built companies like Redfin and RichRelevance and now Deep Sentinel, obviously you strong experience in building and shipping a lot. So what nuggets would you like to share with younger founders and builders? So there's a good chunk of listenership, and also just people who are listening and want to build companies.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's there are a couple that are just things that other people talk about too, right? Which is things like extreme transparency. Man, I'll tell you, there's so many forces when as soon as you get into a boardroom with some high-powered VCs to do things this way or do them this way. And by this way, I mean hiding stuff from your employees or doing this stuff in a back room. Let me just be really clear. And and I would say that there's certainly things you have to keep confidential, like period, full stop, right? I'm in the security industry. Security industry is based on confidentiality. 90% of that's BS. And I would way rather build and run a company the way that I'm doing it now than the way that I did it 20 years ago. One of the things that I do every single week that I think is the simplest and easiest thing, and probably the thing I'm the most proud of in my development over the last 20 years, is every single Monday we have a town hall. Anybody can ask questions, da da da. That part's cool. Allowing people to ask questions is a pretty weak way for a founder to get out of actually addressing transparency because that puts the onus on the other party. It's like burden of proof, right, in a court system. And burden of proof is a big freaking deal. It determines what happens and what doesn't happen. And so in the same way, having a town hall where you can have people ask questions, you really need to have the strongest employees in the world in order to make that work. So instead, what I did was I picked the top agenda topics, and we update every single employee on these 3 topics every single week. Number 1, how much cash do we have in the bank? Within the first 3 minutes of a town hall, every single week for the last 7 years, my CFO has gotten on the phone and said, here's how much cash we have in the bank. Is that good or is that bad? Here's our sales budget for the next month, next quarter. Here's where we're at. Is that good or is that bad? And those two, man, like there's so many ways where you do it sometimes, you don't do it, or you kind of, it's really good, but we didn't really hit the market, but like, look at all this good shit. That's all BS, right? At the end of the day, if you didn't hit your budget, you didn't hit your budget. Period, full stop. And I'll tell you, we pretty much hit the budget every single month for the last year and a half. And that creates such pride and loyalty and trust to know that no, if we miss it, they tell us, but they hit it. And they hit it, and then they hit it, and then they hit it. Now I'm going to go do my job. The third thing I did was, and this is super, 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 super controversial because it has to do with equity and stock, which is another thing that a lot of those high-powered VCs will tell you. No. What you do is you put the number of shares on the offer letter, and then we're just going to do like a 1,000 to 1 reverse split, and it'll be or a 400,000 to 1 split. And it'll be cool. You can tell everyone they get 400,000 shares, they're gonna piss themselves. And it's like, yeah, you could totally do that. So I went entirely the other way. Every single offer letter comes out with your percentage of ownership. Every single employee that gets stock in Deep Sentinel gets the exact same stock structure that I have, which includes founder shares, period. It includes double trigger, period. It includes the same vesting schedule. And this way, when I hire a new executive, they get the exact same thing. When I hire a new employee, they get the exact same thing. They know that they don't have to ask me questions because I pre-negotiated the package that executives will accept. So I spent at RichRelevance probably 20% of my time answering questions about stock. Once we passed about 50 million in valuation, everyone wanted to know, like, did I get this? Can I get this? Oh, I heard somebody got this. Can I get this? And it was such a waste of time. And you know what? At the end, not only did it waste time, it drove trust down because everybody was looking over their shoulder to see what's going on. I give literally every single person the exact same stock structure. I just hired an SVP of marketing. We'll announce that in a week or two. He has the exact same structure as my most junior customer care agent and my guards, my members of my engineering team. Everybody. It's a 5-year vest. It's all back weighted. It's all double trigger, and it always includes founder shares.
Amazing. I love that advice. Maybe a follow-on question. Many times in a startup, right, it's pretty bumpy, and many founders, especially maybe first-time founders, they feel the need to protect. Meaning, like, if you just tell that, oh my God, we are 7 months away from cash out, like, the next round is coming, but it's just for many people, it's like red alert. And so to protect the team, I absorb all the tension and only present the good news. So how do you maybe screen for teammates then, like, because there's a certain level of confidence and trust you need to say, hey, this is exactly how much money we have left, and this is our cash out. This is how we share, how the shares are structured. So how do you advise first time founders to rip off the band-aid and
Yeah.
be more transparent? Because they get very nervous about, oh my God, if I share this, the team will freak out and everyone will leave. That's the prevailing sentiment with first time
Number
founders.
one thing is do it early, do it when things are good, and do it all the time. Do it early, do it when things are good, and do it all the time. If you do it suddenly, right, like, oh, what's going on? You do it only when things are good, and then you stop doing it when things are bad. Let me tell you, man, from my experience, every single time I've been in trouble as a founder, when I did not tell people, they thought it was worse than it was. So if you got to think about, reality is the mean of a normal curve. Everybody's 2 standard deviations worse than where you are. So people just quit because they're like, I don't know. I think things aren't going super well, but I don't know. And so
Right.
I'm going to have to pay my mortgage, pay for my kids' school, pay for my gas, pay for my groceries. I got to assume I'm at least a standard deviation out, but I don't think people actually think this way. I do. But, like 2 standard deviations out, I'm going to assume the worst because I gotta look out for myself, or at least I gotta go start looking, right? And as soon as you start looking, that's the slippery slope. The slippery slope of transparency is rad. It goes the right direction. The
Yeah.
slippery slope of I started looking, dude, once they do that, the commitment is made the second they open up Indeed or they open up that email from her on LinkedIn, right? And it's not about, and the cool thing about this is not about tricking anyone. It's just about like, hey, let's treat each other like adults and have a real conversation. And there's a book by Stephen Covey, which is my favorite business book. It's called The Speed of Trust. Old Stephen Covey didn't do that well after Franklin Covey went in, but nonetheless, the principles are really on point here that trust can never be given, it can be lost, and it can be built. And if you think of trust as being the single most important vector for information transfer amongst your team members, always be building trust. Always be closing, says Alec Baldwin. I say always be building trust.
Right. Amazing. I have one last question before we go
Yeah,
to
please.
the rapid fire round. With all the you've built before the LLM era, during the LLM era, and now we are kind of in the midst of it. So, what AI capabilities excite you the most as it pertains to building Deep Sentinel, and also 2, 3, 5 years from now, what new capabilities do you need to unlock the next level?
Is the one that I think is the most interesting. So distillation is how some of our friends over in China took all the research at Meta and OpenAI, and they built their own model for like $6 million, right? And that got a lot of attention when that happened, but not many people looked at like how did they do this? What did they do? What was going on? And distillation is a technology that's been around for a long time. It's a way to take one model and teach another model how to do something. And so as we build these like massive LLMs that get smarter just through being in the world, which I think is just so neat. What we also get is we get all these features, all this analysis. And if you go back in AI 15, 20 years, almost all AI practitioners spent 90% of their time cleaning data and doing feature engineering. That was what we did. That was it, right? Like I was a feature engineer. If I had to go back and retitle my thing at Amazon, it'd be like manager of feature engineering. The modeling part was this big, the feature engineering part was this big, and the LLM's ability to remove the feature engineering requirement for general problems across domains. Yes, what they do at the end of that is really, really, really cool and it's visible and it's really neat. But if you look at the way the lower layers that go into the attention in the transformer models, all of the features are getting refined and refined and refined. And they're getting refined not just universally, right? In kind of the models that were really powerful in the early 2000s were Bayesian models. So they were intentionally naive. LLMs are intentionally not naive, which blows my mind. So when you say the word two, right, in a sentence, the LLM has the ability to discriminate whether that's TOO, TO, TWO, and Y based on the entire context. Now apply that to every other word in the language and all the different places you might use it, whether that's at a surgery table, or that's in a Dungeons and Dragons campaign, or that's in a science textbook. that ability to contextualize features is so exciting. And then the ability then to use distillation to apply that rapidly, vertically at low cost and high impact into all kinds of solutions.
That's incredible. And I agree. I think distillation is a phenomenal technique. And also, it just unlocks so much efficiency because right now, models are getting so much bigger and you can't keep throwing hundreds of billions at it. So you have to engineer your way into more efficiency. So that's fantastic. All right. With that, we're at the rapid fire round. I'll ask a series of questions and I would love to hear your answers in 15 seconds or less. You ready?
Okay, let's do this.
All right. Question number one. What's your favorite book?
I gave Speed of Trust by Stephen Covey. I will say that my favorite book is Snow Crash by Neal Stephenson, though. I'm reading it for like the 20th time this week.
Amazing. All right. Next question. Which historical figure do you admire the most and why?
So a lot of people are going to say Abraham Lincoln. I'm going to say Ben Franklin. I don't even know if it's true about the whole lightning thing, but like the balls to face opportunity and do what it takes to figure out if it works. I always find that story inspiring.
Yeah, no, that yeah, amazing, amazing human. All right, next question. What has been an important but overlooked AI trend in the last 12 months?
So I think that we've struggled to understand the new Turing test, where it's not answering the question, does the computer feel? It's, does the computer have sufficient capacity to convince me consistently and coherently that it's feeling? And that I think is really interesting.
What's the one thing about physical security that most people don't get?
I mean, I already mentioned it doesn't work, right? That would be the first one. I think the other thing though is let me answer the thing for people though that are thinking about their house or their business is let go of your pride. People are always saying, "Oh, look, I installed this camera and it's so rad and it has this." Switch. Use empathy. Be a criminal. Put yourself into the mindset of a criminal and say, "Cool, can I walk around that? Oh, you look, I just walked to the left." People are so hung up on how rad their security is that they don't put themselves into the shoes of a criminal. I went to an A-list celebrity's house the other day, and he showed me his wall and his gate and his cameras and all this shit. I was inside of his house in 15 seconds from the street. Put yourself into the mindset of the criminal.
Amazing. All right, next question. What separates great AI products from the merely good ones?
I think just like any other technology product is how well they understand the customer, right? I mean, it's really do you build something that wows? OpenAI's big wow things are almost all around image generation, and that was required to open up the door for all the other stuff. But unless you had the images that like really connected with the human beings, you didn't get anywhere.
What have you changed your mind on recently?
I thought LLMs had peaked about a year and a half ago, and I was super wrong.
What's your wildest AI prediction for the next 12 months?
So I mentioned the thing about emotion. I think that dating apps are going to go the way of the dodo. I would way rather have 10 or 15 or one AI based person that actually responds to me, that isn't going to scam me and try to get me to send money to Russia, that is going to listen to me and be able to respond intelligently, that can provide therapy, that can provide emotional support, than I would some bullshit Tinder based interaction with a real human being. And I think that 75% of humans are going to go through that transformation in the next 12 months that are single and looking for companionship.
Amazing. All right, final question. What's your number one advice to founders who are starting out today?
I mentioned transparency. I will say that again. Number two, though, is financial model. And your financial model. Are you building something that is fundable by venture capitalists? A lot of people say it's venture scale, and they go and they say, "Oh no, it can get really big." That's not what venture scale means. You need to understand that venture is a game where you got to have a 10-to-1 odds at making $1 trillion, and they'll take those 10-to-1 odds all day long, and they don't really care about you individually as much as they may love you and hug you and stuff like that. Like, they've got a portfolio and they only need one of the 10 of them to hit. And so know that if you're going to go and fund it yourself, know how the banks work, know how you're financing your business and how that interacts with the members of the financial market that you plan on working with.
Dave, this is a brilliant, brilliant discussion. I loved all your insights, and I think just the knowledge and depth that comes with building companies, I think it's just incredible. So thank you so much for coming onto the show and sharing your amazing insights.
Thank you. It was very fun. I loved your questions.